A man's worth should never be judged by the color of his skin. But on a cold Tuesday at Chicago O'Hare, that's exactly what happened. Dr. Samuel Bennett, a man at the pinnacle of his career, was flying to accept the greatest honor of his life. But one gate agent armed with a little power and a lifetime of prejudice saw not a respected architect, but a threat. She called security. She had him publicly humiliated and removed. She thought she had won. What she didn't know was that Dr. Bennett wasn't just any passenger. And when he returned to her gate less than an hour later, he wasn't alone. He was flanked by a CNN news crew, ready to turn one woman's ugly assumption into a global headline that would change lives forever. This isn't just a story about injustice. It's about the blindingly bright spotlight of karma. The air in Chicago, O'Hare's Terminal 3, was a familiar symphony of chaos, a frantic orchestra of rolling suitcases, garbled final boarding calls, and the distant whining crescendo of jet engines. But at Gate K-12, a temporary lull had settled. The morning rush to Dallas-Fort Worth on Global Wings Air Flight 1775 was over, and the passengers for the 10:45 a.m. departure were a scattered collection of souls in waiting. They were business travelers with weary eyes, families wrangling toddlers, and students lost in the blue glow of their phones. Among them, sitting near the window, with a leather-bound sketchbook open on his lap, was Dr. Samuel Bennett. At 52, he possessed a quiet dignity that seemed to create its own pocket of calm. His salt-and-pepper hair was closely cropped, and his dark suit, though comfortable for travel, was impeccably tailored. He wasn't sketching the airplanes or the people. His pencil was tracing the elegant, soaring lines of a new civic center, a design that existed only in his mind and on these pages. His movements were precise, economical, and infused with a deep meditative focus. This flight was more than just a commute. It was the final leg of a journey to the culmination of his life's work. In Dallas, he was set to receive the Global Keystone Award, the most prestigious prize in architecture, an honor that placed him in the pantheon of the greats. His boarding pass was for seat 14B, a middle seat, an unfortunate but manageable reality of booking late. He noticed, however, that the gate's digital display showed the flight was not completely full. An opportunity. He closed his sketchbook, tucked it carefully into his briefcase, and approached the counter. Behind the counter was Jennifer Albright. Jennifer was a career airline employee, a gate manager who had clawed her way up to this position of modest authority. She wore her uniform like armor, a shield of corporate polyester and regulations. Today was a bad day, in a string of bad days. A system outage earlier had caused a backlog. Her coffee was cold, and a passenger on the previous flight had threatened to sue because his bag was delayed by 7 minutes. Jennifer's patience had worn down to a single, frayed thread. She saw the world through a lens of problems to be managed, and passengers were often the biggest problem of all. When Dr. Bennett approached, she didn't look up from her screen. "Yes." She clipped her fingers, still tapping furiously. "Good morning," Samuel said, his voice calm and even. "I am Samuel Bennett on flight 1775. My seat is 14B. I noticed on the display that the flight isn't entirely full. I was wondering if it might be possible to move to a window or an aisle seat, perhaps an exit row if one is available. I'd be happy to pay any applicable fee." Jennifer stopped typing. She looked up and her eyes did a quick, dismissive scan. She saw a black man in a suit. Her internal calculus, honed by years of unspoken biases, began its ugly work. The suit was nice, too nice, maybe. Was it real? He was too calm, too articulate. It felt practiced, a performance. She'd seen his type before, she told herself. They always wanted something for free, always tried to game the system, always had an angle. Her face, already a mask of professional curtness, tightened. "The seat map is locked for pre-departure, sir. We can't make changes now." It was a lie, and a lazy one. The flight was still an hour from boarding. Samuel, a frequent flyer who knew the procedures, recognized it instantly. "I see," he said, maintaining his pleasant demeanor. "I believe boarding doesn't begin for another 50 minutes. Usually changes can be made until the boarding process starts." Jennifer's eyes narrowed. He was challenging her. She hated being challenged. It was an affront to her authority in this small kingdom of laminated counters and retractable barriers. "Sir, I have told you the policy. The system is locked." She turned her monitor slightly away from him, a clear gesture of dismissal. Samuel was not a man to be easily dismissed. He wasn't angry, merely persistent in the face of illogicality. "Could you perhaps double-check for me? It would only take a moment. As I said, I'm happy to pay." A woman in a red coat in the line behind Samuel shifted her weight impatiently. The pressure of an audience pricked at Jennifer's already raw nerves. She felt a flush of anger. This man was making her look incompetent, or worse, unhelpful. He was creating a scene. "Sir," she said, her voice now louder, colder, and dripping with condescension, "I am not going to repeat myself again. There are no other seats available for you. Please step aside and let me help the next passenger." The phrase hung in the air, "for you." It was subtle, but to Samuel it was as loud as a siren. It was a clear act of demarcation of othering. He wasn't just any passenger. He was a problem passenger. "I don't wish to cause a problem," Samuel said, his voice still low, but now with a new firm edge. "I'm simply making a standard request. If you are unable to assist, perhaps there is another agent or a supervisor I could speak to." That was the final straw. For Jennifer, the word supervisor was a direct threat to her authority. A challenge she had to quash immediately and decisively. Her prejudice, which had been simmering just beneath the surface, now boiled over into outright hostility. She saw her opening to end this, to reassert her control. She looked past Samuel, her eyes scanning the terminal. "This passenger is becoming disruptive," she announced to no one in particular, though her voice carried across the waiting area. Samuel stood stunned into silence for a beat. Disruptive. He hadn't raised his voice, used a single profane word, or made a threatening gesture. He had made a polite request, and then politely questioned a lie. "Ma'am, I am being anything but disruptive," he said, his composure starting to crack just enough to show the steel beneath. "I am a first-class ticket holder who simply asked for a seat change." He had purposely bought a refundable first-class ticket, a habit from years of unpredictable project schedules, a detail he hadn't thought to mention until now. Jennifer's face twisted into a smirk of vindication. "Oh, a first-class ticket holder, are you?" The disbelief was thick in her voice. The internal narrative she'd built was now complete. A man who didn't look the part, claiming a status he couldn't possibly have, trying to bully his way into a free upgrade. It all made sense to her. She reached for the phone at her station without breaking eye contact with Samuel. Her voice was now chillingly calm, the voice of someone who knows they hold all the power. "Yes, this is Jennifer Albright at gate K12. I need security. I have a passenger here, claiming to be first class, who is becoming aggressive and refusing to comply with crew member instructions. Yes. I think he needs to be removed." Heads turned. Phones were subtly lifted. The quiet hum of the gate area evaporated, replaced by a tense, shocked silence. Dr. Samuel Bennett, a man hours away from being celebrated as a visionary, stood accused and condemned, the word aggressive echoing in the suddenly very still air. The only sound was the click of the phone as Jennifer Albright placed it back in its cradle, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. She had won. The arrival of security at an airport gate changes the atmospheric pressure. The ambient hum of travel is instantly replaced by a focused, anxious silence. Conversations trail off. All eyes fix on the uniforms, the radios, the practiced stoic expressions of authority. At Gate K-12, 2 airport police officers materialized within minutes, their presence a stark and public validation of Jennifer Albright's accusation. The lead officer was a tall man in his late 40s named Miller. He wasn't a brute. His face was etched with the weary lines of someone who had seen every flavor of human frustration the travel industry could produce. His younger partner, Officer Reed, was more rigid, his hand resting instinctively near his belt. "Ma'am, you called about a disturbance," Officer Miller asked, addressing Jennifer, but keeping his eyes on Samuel. "Yes, thank you for coming so quickly," Jennifer said, her voice a performance of beleaguered professionalism. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Samuel. This man was causing a scene. He refused to accept a crew member instruction and became aggressive when I couldn't accommodate his demands. I'm concerned for the safety of the other passengers and the crew. The word aggressive was a weapon, and she wielded it with precision. It was a word that, when applied to a black man, carried a heavy, preloaded weight of societal fear and prejudice. Samuel felt the weight of it land on him, an invisible shroud that instantly transformed him from a customer with a query into a potential threat. Officer Miller turned his full attention to Samuel. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with us. We need to have a word away from the gate." His tone was neutral, procedural. "Officer, with all due respect, that is a complete misrepresentation of what occurred." Samuel said, his voice a low, controlled current of disbelief. He knew that raising his voice, showing any hint of the outrage boiling within him, would only serve to prove Jennifer's lie. He had to be twice as calm, twice as rational. "I made a simple request for a seat change. This agent, Ms. Albright, refused. When I politely questioned her, she accused me of being disruptive and called you. That is the sum total of our interaction." Across the seating area, a young woman named Zoe Peterson, a journalism student on her way home for a family visit, watched the scene unfold with a growing sense of sickness. She had heard the entire exchange. She had heard the man's polite tone and the agent's escalating hostility. She saw the lie playing out in real time. Instinct honed by her studies and her generation's impulse to document took over. She discreetly lifted her phone, angled it through the gap between 2 seats, and pressed record. The small red light was a silent digital witness. "He's lying," Jennifer snapped, her voice sharp. He raised his voice. He was demanding. "You can ask anyone." She gestured vaguely at the other passengers, none of whom dared to make eye contact, all suddenly fascinated by their shoes or the departure board. They were unwilling participants, hostages to the unfolding drama, and most wanted nothing more than for it to be over. "Sir, we can discuss this away from the gate area." Officer Miller repeated, his voice a little firmer this time. "Let's not make this more of a scene than it already is." "This scene was created by her, not by me," Samuel insisted, holding his ground. "I am a ticketed passenger for this flight. I have done nothing wrong. To be removed from this gate is unacceptable. I would like to see your supervisor, and I would like to file a formal complaint against this agent." Jennifer laughed, a short, ugly bark of a sound. "File all the complaints you want. After you're escorted out by security, you won't be flying on global wings today, or possibly ever again." It was a threat and a promise. This was the moment of decision. Samuel knew that to resist further would be futile and dangerous. It would give them the physical pretext to match the verbal one Jennifer had already provided. The optics would be terrible, a black man struggling with police in an airport. The narrative would write itself, and the truth of the preceding 5 minutes would be lost forever. With a deep, steadying breath, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. Very well. He picked up his briefcase, the weight of his sketchbook, inside a painful reminder of the brilliant future he was supposed to be flying toward. I will cooperate, but I want it on record that this is being done under protest and based on what I know to be a false and malicious report by that agent. He looked directly at Jennifer Albright, and for the first time his gaze was not one of politeness or inquiry, but of cold, hard clarity. He saw her for exactly what she was, a petty tyrant ruling a tiny fiefdom, her power derived entirely from her uniform and the system that was built to believe her over him. As Officer Miller and Officer Reed flanked him, a low murmur rippled through the passengers. It was the sound of discomfort, of quiet pity, of nervous relief that it wasn't them. They watched as this distinguished, well-dressed man was treated like a common criminal, escorted away from the gate, not for anything he had done, but for who he was and what a single biased employee had decided he was. The walk through the concourse was a new kind of humiliation. It was a perp walk without a crime. People stared. They saw the uniform, and they saw him, and they drew their own conclusions. Samuel kept his head held high, his posture erect. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him slumped in defeat. But inside a cold fury was building a precise and focused anger that was far more dangerous than the aggression Jennifer had imagined. They took him to a small, windowless office tucked away behind a concession stand, a beige box of bureaucratic purgatory. They asked for his ID. He provided his driver's license and his passport. Officer Miller's eyes widened slightly as he read the name, and then looked again at the man in front of him. "Dr. Samuel Bennett?" he asked, a hint of confusion in his voice. "Yes," Samuel replied. "And you're an architect?" "Among other things," Samuel said evenly. A quick search on his phone by Officer Reed confirmed it. The screen filled with images of breathtaking buildings, articles from prestigious magazines, and a press release from the Global Keystone Foundation. The top result was a news story published just yesterday: Samuel Bennett to receive architecture's highest honor in Dallas ceremony. Officer Miller looked from his phone to Samuel, then back again. He looked at his partner. The entire context of the situation had just been seismically altered. This wasn't some random, disgruntled passenger. This was one of the most celebrated architects in the world. He cleared his throat. "Dr. Bennett, there appears to have been a misunderstanding." Samuel looked at the officer, his expression unreadable. "The only misunderstanding, officer," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is that Ms. Albright believes her authority is absolute and her prejudice is invisible. She is about to learn in a very public way that she is wrong on both counts." He reached for his phone. "Now, if you don't mind, I have a few calls to make." The beige, windowless room was designed to be an information vacuum, a place where incidents were managed and contained. But in the age of instant connectivity, its soundproofed walls were meaningless. While Officer Miller and Officer Reed were trying to recalibrate their understanding of the situation, Dr. Samuel Bennett was transforming the tiny office into the command center of a counteroffensive. He didn't call a lawyer first. A lawyer was for later, for damages and depositions. His first call was to someone far more potent. In the immediate moment, his publicist, a sharp, fiercely loyal woman in New York named Jessica Finch. "Jess, it's Sam," he said, his voice a low, urgent hum. He relayed the events of the last 20 minutes with the dispassionate precision of an architect describing a flawed blueprint. He gave her the airline, the flight number, the gate, and the agent's name, Jennifer Albright. On the other end of the line, Jessica's mind was racing. This was not just a client service issue. It was a 5-alarm public relations fire But the fire wasn't for their side. It was an opportunity. "Sam, are you okay?" she asked, first the concern genuine. "I'm fine. I'm furious, but I am fine," he replied. "I'm in a security office at O'Hare. They're realizing they've made a colossal error. Stay there. Don't talk to anyone else from the airline. Don't accept an apology. Don't accept a voucher. Don't accept anything." Jessica instructed her words rapid fire. "Just sit tight. I'm handling it." Her second sentence was the one that mattered. "And Sam, your speech in Dallas just got a new opening paragraph." His next call was even more impactful. He had, over the years, designed broadcast headquarters and studios for several major media networks. He had built more than just buildings. He had built relationships. He scrolled through his contacts to a name that was not in his regular rotation, but was reserved for extraordinary circumstances. This qualified. He dialed Kathleen Powell, a senior national correspondent for CNN, whom he had met at a fundraiser a few years prior. She was based in Chicago. It was a long shot, but he knew her reputation. She was a bulldog, a journalist who could smell hypocrisy from a mile away. "Kathleen, this is Samuel Bennett. We met a few years ago." He explained the situation again, this time with a journalist's ear in mind, focusing on the verifiable facts, the lie about the seating chart, the unprovoked accusation of aggression, the public removal by police, his status as a first-class passenger, and the reason for his travel to accept the Global Keystone Award. He was the perfect victim, unimpeachable, articulate, and wronged in a way that tapped directly into a raw nerve in the American psyche. Kathleen Powell was silent for a moment, the gears of a veteran reporter's mind spinning. An award-winning black architect, a global leader in his field, falsely accused of being aggressive and removed from a flight by a white gate agent. It was a story that had everything David versus Goliath race, corporate malfeasance, and a protagonist of immense stature. "Where are you right now, Dr. Bennett?" she asked, her voice already shifting into professional gear. "A security office near Gate K12, Terminal 3, he said. "Don't move," she said, mirroring Jessica's instruction. "I'm 10 minutes from O'Hare. I can have a camera crew there in 20. Will you go on camera?" "I will," Samuel said without hesitation. "And I would like to do it right back at Gate K12. I'd like for Ms. Albright to be there when we do it." A grim smile touched Kathleen's lips. "Dr. Bennett," she said, "I think we can arrange that." Meanwhile, the ripple effect of Samuel's identity was slowly making its way up the Global Wings Air corporate ladder. Officer Miller, understanding the magnitude of the blunder, had called his supervisor, who in turn called the airport's on-site airline operations manager. The operations manager, a harried man named David Chen, looked up. Dr. Bennett felt a wave of nausea and immediately called his regional director. The news was a hot potato being tossed up a chain of command that was designed for efficiency in logistics, not crisis communications. Every person who heard the story had the same reaction, a sharp intake of breath, followed by a variation of "oh no." Back at Gate K12, Jennifer Albright was feeling smug. She had successfully removed the problem and was now efficiently boarding Flight 1775. She was in control. Her world was orderly again. She had protected her gate. She had enforced the rules. She felt a surge of pride in her decisive action. Her desk phone rang. It was David Chen, the operations manager. His voice was tight with a barely controlled panic. "Jennifer, this is David. About the passenger you had removed from 1775. I need you to tell me exactly what happened." Jennifer recounted her version of the story, painting Samuel as belligerent and demanding, embellishing his tone, and inventing actions to justify her response. "He was becoming a threat, David. I did what I had to do for the safety of the flight." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Jennifer," David said, his voice strained. "Do you have any idea who that man is?" "Some guy who thought he could bully me into an upgrade," she said dismissively. "That some guy is Dr. Samuel Bennett. He's an architect. A very, very famous architect. He's on his way to Dallas to accept the Global Keystone Award. It's like the Nobel Prize for building things. The board of our parent company just donated $10 million to a museum he designed." The smugness evaporated from Jennifer's face, replaced by a pale, clammy shock. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath her. "What?" she whispered. "The CEO's office has been alerted. They are extremely unhappy." David continued, his voice dropping. "He's still in the security office. You need to go there. You need to apologize. You need to get him on that flight. Do whatever it takes. Fix this." The command was clear, but the blood had drained from Jennifer's face. Apologize to him. The idea was mortifying. It meant admitting she was wrong. It meant groveling. But the alternative, the unspoken threat in David's voice, was worse. Her career, her carefully constructed kingdom, was suddenly teetering on the edge of a cliff. She took a shaky breath, straightened her uniform, and pasted a brittle smile on her face. She would go. She would apologize. She would smooth it all over with a practiced corporate apology that meant nothing. She would fix it. She walked away from the gate, her stride confident, but her hands trembling slightly. She was on her way to put out a fire, completely unaware that Dr. Samuel Bennett, his publicist and CNN, were currently dousing the entire airline in jet fuel and striking a match. The storm was no longer coming. It had already arrived. The journey from Gate K-12 to the small security office was for Jennifer Albright a walk through a hall of mirrors, each reflection showing a different version of her own impending doom. The initial shock had given way to a frantic, defensive anger. It wasn't her fault. How was she supposed to know who he was? He didn't look like a world-famous architect. He looked like the others who always gave her trouble. Her mind scrambled for justifications, for ways to spin the narrative so that she remained the diligent employee and he the unreasonable customer. She arrived at the door to the office just as Officer Miller was stepping out. His expression was grim. "He's in there," the officer said, his tone devoid of the collegial respect he might have shown her an hour ago. "And I'd choose your next words very carefully, ma'am." Jennifer bristled at the warning, but pushed the door open. Dr. Samuel Bennett was sitting in a plastic chair, his briefcase on his lap, his phone to his ear. He looked up as she entered, his eyes holding a calm, assessing gaze that made her skin crawl. He didn't look angry or defeated. He looked powerful. "Mr. Bennett," she began, the name feeling foreign and clumsy on her tongue. I'm Jennifer Albright from the Gate. It appears there's been a significant misunderstanding." Samuel ended his call with a quiet, "Thank you," and slipped the phone into his pocket. He rose slowly from his chair. "Ms. Albright," he said, his voice resonating in the small room. "There has been no misunderstanding. There has been a clear and deliberate action. You profiled me, you lied to me, you publicly slandered me, and you had me removed under false pretenses. The only misunderstanding is your belief that you would face no consequences for it." Jennifer's practiced corporate smile faltered. This wasn't going to be a simple, "I'm sorry, here's a voucher" situation. "Sir, our policy. Your policy does not involve fabricating claims of aggression." Samuel interrupted, his voice cutting through her excuse like a scalpel. "Your policy does not involve humiliating a passenger because you are unwilling to do your job. Your actions were not born of policy, they were born of prejudice." Her face flushed a deep, mottled red. "Now see here, you have no right to accuse me of that I was following security protocols. You were. Samuel agreed with a chilling calmness. You were indeed following a protocol. It's a protocol of your own, making one that allows you to treat people with disrespect based on your own biases. And I think the world deserves to hear more about it. Shall we? He gestured towards the door. Jennifer was confused. Shall we? What, your flight is boarding. I can personally escort you onto the plane right now. We'll get you settled in first class. A small, humorless smile touched Samuel's lips. I'm not going to my flight just yet. I am, however, going back to your gate, and you are going to come with me. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. Bemused and increasingly unnerved, Jennifer followed him out of the office and back into the main concourse. As they walked, she tried to regain control. Sir Dr. Bennett, really this isn't necessary. We can resolve this. Her words died in her throat. As they rounded the corner and gate K12 came back into view, the scene had been utterly transformed. The last of the passengers were shuffling onto the jet bridge, but a new crowd had gathered. Positioned directly in front of Jennifer's counter was a tall, professional woman holding a microphone with the iconic red and white CNN logo. Next to her, a cameraman was hoisting a large broadcast camera onto his shoulder, its dark lens like a great, unblinking eye. Standing beside the reporter, looking entirely coerced, was a younger woman Jennifer vaguely recognized from the waiting area, Zoe Peterson. The blood drained from Jennifer Albright's face. The hum of the terminal seemed to fade into a dull roar in her ears. This was not happening. This was a nightmare. Kathleen Powell, the CNN correspondent, stepped forward as Samuel came to a stop. Dr. Bennett, she said, her voice crisp and clear for the camera. Thank you for speaking with us. Can you tell us what happened here today? Samuel turned not to the reporter, but to face Jennifer directly. The camera swung to capture them both in the frame. The last few passengers, sensing a major event, stopped and pulled out their own phones. The audience Jennifer had performed for earlier had now reassembled, but this time the stage was infinitely larger. I can... Samuel said, his voice steady and strong, now amplified by Kathleen's microphone. I came to this gate as a ticketed first-class passenger on Global Wings Air, and I politely asked this agent, Ms. Jennifer Albright, if a seat change was possible. In response, she lied about airline policy. When I calmly questioned her lie, she announced to the entire gate that I was being disruptive. When I persisted, she escalated, claiming I was being aggressive. She then called security and had me forcibly removed from the gate area. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. I was publicly humiliated. I was treated like a criminal, not for anything I did, but for what Ms. Albright saw when she looked at me. She did not see a customer. She did not see a passenger. She saw a threat. Kathleen Powell turned to Jennifer, the microphone now pointed at her like an interrogator's lamp. Ms. Albright, CNN, is that an accurate description of events? Did you accuse Dr. Bennett, a recipient of the Global Keystone Award, of being aggressive for asking to change his seat? Jennifer was frozen. Her mind was a maelstrom of panic. Every corporate media training session she'd ever attended vanished in a puff of pure terror. She looked at the camera lens, at the determined face of the reporter, at the cold, disappointed eyes of Samuel Bennett. She opened her mouth, but only a strangled squeak came out. We also have a witness, Kathleen continued, turning to Zoe. Ms. Peterson, you recorded the initial interaction on your phone. What did you see? Zoe, though nervous, spoke with the clarity of a person who knew she was on the right side of history. I heard everything, she said. He was completely polite. Her voice was the one that kept getting louder and meaner. He never raised his voice once. The agent was the one who was aggressive. My video shows it all. She held up her phone, the screen showing the video file ready to be sent. The final nail was hammered into Jennifer Albright's professional coffin. A world-renowned public figure's testimony. A correspondent from a global news network. And now digital irrefutable proof. Jennifer looked wildly around, seeking an escape, an ally, a place to hide. But there was none. There was only the harsh light of the camera, the accusing silence of the onlookers, and the composed, unwavering gaze of the man she had tried to erase. In that moment, she was no longer Jennifer Albright, gate manager, a woman of authority. She was just Jennifer, a person whose ugly internal prejudice had been dragged out of the shadows and into the glare of a national spotlight. Her little kingdom had crumbled, and the whole world was watching. The moment Kathleen Powell's report, complete with Zoe Peterson's damning cell phone footage, hit the CNN wire, it was no longer an incident. It was a full-blown corporate catastrophe for Global Wings Air. The story spread across the internet with the speed of a wildfire. The hashtags are flying while black. Global Wings, shame, and how justice for Dr. Bennett began trending on Twitter within the hour. In the gleaming, sterile tower of Global Wings Air corporate headquarters in downtown Chicago, the atmosphere was one of controlled panic. Phones rang incessantly. The communications department was drowning in a tsunami of media requests. The stock price, which had been stable at market open, began to show a nervous tremor. The emergency board meeting was convened by Robert Chen, the airline's CEO. Chen was a man who prided himself on data, on logistics, on the billion-dollar chess game of fleet management and route optimization. He despised the messy, unpredictable world of human error, and what had happened at Gate K-12 was the messiest he had seen in his 7-year tenure. He stood before his executive team, his face a granite mask of fury. On a massive screen behind him, the CNN report played on a loop. Dr. Bennett's calm, powerful testimony contrasted with Jennifer Albright's deer-in-the-headlights terror. "Explain this to me," Chen said, his voice dangerously low. "Someone right now explain to me how we allowed one of our gate managers to publicly crucify a man who is practically a national treasure, a man our own charitable foundation has celebrated. How the head of North American operations, a man named Bill Ewing, cleared his throat. Robert, from the initial reports, it seems Ms. Albright felt the passenger was becoming unruly. She was exercising her authority to ensure an on-time departure, and "Don't you dare feed me that corporate nonsense, Bill," Chen roared, slamming his hand on the polished mahogany table. The room flinched. "I saw the video. The world saw the video. Unruly. The man was as calm as a monk. He was a paragon of dignity, while our employee was having a complete meltdown. She didn't exercise authority. She abused it. She didn't see a passenger. She saw a stereotype. And in doing so, she has just cost this company millions of dollars in brand damage. Our slogan is connecting the world. She just disconnected us from a huge portion of it." The airline's first response was a masterclass in corporate panic. A junior public relations staffer, acting on an outdated crisis protocol, issued a boilerplate statement. "Global Wings Air is aware of an incident at Chicago O'Hare, and we are investigating the matter fully. We are committed to providing a safe and welcoming environment for all our customers." The public's reaction was immediate and vicious. The statement was mocked as soulless and evasive. Investigating. "We all saw the video," one viral tweet read. "Welcoming environment." "Tell that to Dr. Bennett," read another. Jessica Finch Samuel's publicist saw the weak statement and pounced. She issued a counter-statement on his behalf. "Dr. Bennett is gratified by the public's support, but is deeply disappointed in Global Wings Air's anemic response. This was not an incident. It was an act of blatant racial bias. An investigation is not required when the evidence is already being broadcast globally. What is required is accountability. The word accountability became the rallying cry. It ricocheted through social media and was picked up by other news outlets. Competitor airlines, smelling blood in the water, began running targeted social media ads about their commitment to diversity and inclusion. Back in the boardroom, Robert Chen knew his initial clumsy response had failed. He needed to cauterize the wound, and fast. "Get Dr. Bennett on the phone," he commanded. He or not his publicist, not his lawyer. Him. "Find out where he is. I will fly to Dallas myself tonight if I have to, and get me his original flight details. I want to know everything." An aide scurried out and returned a minute later, his face pale. "Sir, we've rebooked him. He's on a private jet. Competitor airline Atlas Air chartered it for him. Complimentary. Their CEO called him personally to apologize on behalf of the industry." Chen felt like he had been punched in the gut. Not only had they lost the chance for a personal apology, but their chief competitor had swooped in and played the hero. It was a devastatingly effective PR move. "And the employee?" Chen asked, his voice now cold and dead. "Jennifer Albright. What is her status?" "She's been removed from duty," Bill Ewing said. "She's been placed on immediate unpaid administrative leave pending the outcome of the full HR investigation." "Unpaid leave?" Chen repeated, his disbelief turning to ice. "Bill, the investigation was broadcast on CNN. Her trial was held on Twitter, and we were the co-defendant. Her career with this airline is over. Her career in this entire industry is over. I want her terminated, immediately. I want a press release drafted stating that her actions are in direct violation of our company's core values, that we have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, and that she has been terminated effective immediately. No severance. And book a conference room. I want to address the media personally in 1 hour." It was a brutal, decisive move. Jennifer Albright, who had sought to protect her small kingdom by casting out one man, now found herself cast out of the entire empire. The fallout was just beginning. The Global Keystone Foundation issued a statement expressing their profound disappointment in Global Wings Air. Corporate partners began calling their social responsibility clauses in their contracts suddenly coming to the forefront. The stock was now in a nosedive. The implosion was swift and spectacular. The actions of one employee, fueled by a moment of unchecked prejudice, had sent a multi-billion-dollar corporation into a tailspin. And for Jennifer Albright, the woman at the center of the storm, her suspension was only the first step in a long, hard fall. The world she knew was gone, and she was about to discover what it was like to be the one on the outside, looking in, with no one willing to let her through the gate. For Jennifer Albright, the termination wasn't just the loss of a job, it was the erasure of an identity. For 22 years, Jennifer Albright, gate manager for Global Wings Air, had been the sum total of who she was. Her authority, her crisp uniform, the respect or fear she commanded in her small corner of the airport, it was all gone, vaporized in a single, globally televised afternoon. The call from HR was brief and brutally clinical. Her access to the company's internal systems was revoked while she was still on the line. Her airport security clearance was voided. A box containing the sad detritus of her desk, a framed photo of her cat, a chipped World's Best Manager mug, a collection of airline-branded pens would be couriered to her home. She was instructed not to contact any current Global Wings employees. She was, in effect, a ghost. But karma in its truest form is not a single thunderclap of retribution. It is a slow, grinding erosion. Jennifer soon learned that being fired was only the beginning. Her name was now infamous. In the aviation industry, a tightly knit world where reputation is everything, she was radioactive. She applied for positions at other airlines, even smaller regional carriers. Her applications were met with a wall of silence, or polite but firm rejections. One recruiter, a former colleague she knew casually, was brutally honest over a hushed phone call. "Jen, I'm sorry. No one will touch you," he said. "It's not just the incident itself, it's the video. You became the face of every bad customer service experience everywhere. Hiring you would be a PR nightmare." Her digital footprint was a minefield. Googling her name brought up the CNN clip, dozens of articles detailing her racist rant, and thousands of comments calling her a Karen, a bigot, and worse. A few online sleuths had even dug up her social media profiles before she could delete them, reposting old tone-deaf posts she had made years ago, adding them to the mosaic of her public condemnation. The financial pressure began to mount. Without a salary, her modest savings dwindled at an alarming rate. Her apartment, once a sanctuary from the chaos of the airport, began to feel like a prison. The days once structured by flight schedules and boarding procedures now stretched before her empty and silent, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional news report that would re-air the clip of her worst moment. A deeper, more insidious karma was also at work. The network of colleagues and work friends she had cultivated over 2 decades dissolved overnight. People she had shared holiday shifts with, people whose children's birthdays she remembered, now crossed the street to avoid her. They were afraid of being tainted by association. Her isolation was absolute. She had judged a man on a superficial basis and cast him out of her community at the gate. Now she was being judged on the content of her character and cast out of her own. A few months into her unemployment, Global Wings Air's legal department sent her a letter. Dr. Bennett was not suing the airline. Instead, as part of a settlement, he had required the company to implement a sweeping new mandatory training program on implicit bias and de-escalation, designed by a leading sociological firm he had recommended. The letter informed Jennifer that as the instigating party of the incident, a civil suit filed by the airline against her to recoup some of the financial damages and brand restoration costs was under consideration. They were exploring whether her actions constituted gross negligence and a willful violation of company policy which would make her personally liable. The threat of financial ruin was the final turn of the screw. She had to hire a lawyer, draining what was left of her savings. She spent her days in depositions reliving the incident at Gate K-12 over and over again. Stripped of her uniform and authority, she was just a middle-aged woman in a cheap blazer trying to defend the indefensible. Investigators from the airline's HR department combing through her past unearthed a pattern. Over the years, there had been a disproportionately high number of complaints filed against her by passengers of color. They had all been minor incidents dismissed at the time as he said, she said disputes. But now, viewed through the lens of her confrontation with Dr. Bennett, they formed a clear, damning pattern of behavior. Her history, which she had thought buried, was now Exhibit A in the case against her. The final bitterest pill was a magazine profile she saw while waiting in a grocery store line. It was an extensive feature on Dr. Samuel Bennett in Forbes. It detailed his life, his work, and the O'Hare incident. But it focused on his response. He spoke not of anger or revenge, but of the opportunity the moment had created. He was using his new elevated platform to advocate for systemic change. The article quoted him, "The agent that day was not a monster. She was a symptom of a disease. The disease is ignorance. It's a failure of empathy. Firing her solves the symptom, but I'm interested in curing the disease." Reading those words, Jennifer felt a pang of something more complex than anger. It was a strange mix of shame and resentment. He was being lauded as a saint, a thought leader, a visionary for social change. He had moved on and moved up, using the very incident that had destroyed her as a stepping stone. Her act of petty tyranny had ironically made him more powerful than ever. Her karma wasn't a prison sentence or a massive fine. It was a life sentence of obscurity and regret. It was the daily reality of working a minimum wage job stocking shelves at a big box store wearing a flimsy vest instead of a tailored uniform. Her name tag reading just Jennifer. It was the constant gnawing knowledge that she had held a moment of power in her hands and had used it to ruin not only a good man's day, but her own entire life. She was forced to live every single day with the quiet, unremarkable, and utterly anonymous consequences of her own prejudice. The ballroom in Dallas was a cathedral of light and sound. Thousands of the world's most influential architects, designers, and patrons of the arts were on their feet, their applause thundering through the vast space. On the stage, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlights, stood Dr. Samuel Bennett, holding the Global Keystone Award. The award itself was a heavy, sculpted piece of crystal and titanium, but it felt almost weightless in his hands compared to the events of the past week. He stepped up to the podium, and a hush fell over the room. The world was expecting him to deliver his prepared speech about the intersection of sustainable design and urban community, the speech he had been writing and rewriting for months. But the man at the podium was not the same man who had boarded that flight in Chicago. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm and resonant, carrying to the furthest corners of the hall. "I have a speech in my pocket. It's a good speech. It's about form and function and the soul of our cities." He paused, looking out over the sea of faces. "But I cannot in good conscience deliver that speech tonight, because the most important structure I have been forced to contemplate this week was not made of steel or glass. It was a social structure, an invisible architecture of prejudice that we pretend does not exist even as it shapes every corner of our world." He told them the story. He didn't use hyperbole or an angry tone. He recounted the events at Gate K-12 with the same calm, factual precision he had used with the police, with his publicist, and with CNN. He spoke of Jennifer Albright, not as a villain, but as a product of a broken system. "The power of architecture," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "is the power to define space. We build walls that separate and bridges that connect. We design gateways that welcome and barriers that exclude. For too long, we have been complicit in designing a world that contains far too many barriers and not enough bridges. A world where a man can be judged not by the content of his character or the caliber of his work, but by the color of his skin in a gateway to the world like an international airport." He announced that he was partnering with Global Wings Air, a partnership born from the ashes of their conflict. He was using his platform, and they were using their considerable resources to establish the Bennett Foundation for Inclusive Design and Training. The foundation would work with corporations, municipalities, and police forces to fundamentally redesign their public-facing protocols, rooting out the systemic rot of implicit bias. His first act as the award winner was not to celebrate his victory, but to repurpose his platform. "This award," he said, "lifting the gleaming keystone, is the greatest honor of my life. But its true value will not be measured by its place on my mantelpiece. It will be measured by our ability to use this moment, this spotlight, as a tool to dismantle the old, crumbling structures of prejudice and to begin the blueprints for a better, more equitable world. That is the project of our lifetime. Let us begin." The applause that followed was more than a polite ovation. It was a roar of approval, of understanding, of shared purpose. In the months that followed, the story of Dr. Bennett and Gate K-12 became a case study in corporate responsibility and social justice. Global Wings, Air, under the direct and intense supervision of Robert Chen, underwent a painful but necessary transformation. The training program became a new industry standard. Dr. Bennett never saw Jennifer Albright again. He rarely thought of her not out of malice, but because his focus was on the future, on the larger problem she had represented. His life had been irrevocably changed, but he had chosen to alchemize a moment of profound humiliation into a catalyst for profound change. The final quiet resolution came nearly a year later. Zoe Peterson, the young journalism student, received a personal letter from Dr. Bennett. He thanked her for her courage and integrity, for choosing to bear witness when it would have been easier to look away. Enclosed was a check and a letter, announcing she was the first recipient of a full scholarship from the Bennett Foundation to complete her master's degree in investigative journalism at Columbia University. The story had found its end. A woman who abused her power lost everything. A corporation humbled by its own failings was forced to rebuild itself on a better foundation. And a good man faced with ugly prejudice refused to be a victim. Instead, he became an architect of change, proving that the strongest structures are not built of concrete and steel, but of dignity, integrity, and an unwavering belief in a better design for humanity. That is the incredible true-to-life story of how a moment of ugly prejudice at an airport gate became a global lesson in accountability. Dr. Samuel Bennett's journey shows us that the most powerful response to injustice isn't rage, but focused, intelligent action. He didn't just win a personal battle, he leveraged his victory to change the very system that had wronged him. Jennifer Albright's story is a stark reminder that the small thrones of power we occupy in our daily lives come with immense responsibility, and that karma can be as swift and unforgiving as a cancelled flight. What do you think? Was the airline's response enough? Was Jennifer Albright's fate a just one? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. These conversations matter. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you are subscribed to our channel for more true stories of injustice, resilience, and the ultimate triumph of character. Thank you for listening.